All right, guys, I recently got some requests on my YouTube channel to teach some hair cutting, and I really haven't been doing that much because of the quarantine. I don't really have models that I can bring in, but I do happen to have this head, so I'm going to show you a haircut today. And the haircut that we're going to do is sort of based on the American Psycho haircut. What's his name? Patrick Bateman, right? Christian Bale. This is a haircut that has been very popular in recent months. I've been getting a lot of clients asking for it. Not like a lot as in a majority of clients, but a lot as in I'll get 2 or 3 a week, where for the last 10 years I've gotten 0 a week. And so I think especially since everyone's hair is growing out through this whole like lockdown situation, it might become a popular haircut in the next year. So I wanted to just do a quick rundown of how I do this haircut. Because I'm working with long hair to begin with, the first thing I'm going to do is just cut off any of the excess hair that I know I'm going to not have left on the haircut anyway. So I'm going to give it a very, very rough, crappy cut, just to get some of the excess length out of the way, so that as I'm working through the haircut and taking smaller sections, I don't have to push so much hair around at one time. So I know these sides are going to be at least to the bottom of the ear, so I'm just going to cut it off there. The back of the haircut's going to be somewhat mullety, so I'm definitely going to leave a lot of this length here. But also, I want to be very mindful to leave hair in these corners because you want the front to connect to the back. So I don't want to just do straight chop and then long hair. So what we're actually going to do for now is a little bit of a bowl haircut. I want to leave a lot of this length in these corners just in case. So now we have a good starting point for our haircut. We have easier hair to work with. And the very first thing I'm going to do is part out the top of the hair to get it out of my way. This is obviously so that I can work with less hair at once. I'm just going to part like a horseshoe around the back. It doesn't have to be super perfect because in the end, this is all going to be connected and blended anyways. So with this top hair out of the way, I can begin taking sections on the sides to create the shape of my haircut. Now, even though I just took off all the length here and it looks like maybe I'm trying to dictate the shape to begin with, we're not actually thinking about the perimeter of the haircut yet. Hang on, get that out of the way. We're not actually going to think about the perimeter of the haircut until later. So for now, we're just going to focus on the layers throughout here and the internal structure of the haircut. So the first thing I want to do is comb the hair basically in the way that I want it to lay, which is kind of back and down. And then my sections are actually going to follow that direction. So I'll take one piece here, pull it straight out off the head. When I'm cutting hair, 99% of what I cut is going to come straight off the head. I rarely pull things down like this unless maybe I'm doing a graduated bob, and I rarely pull things up like this unless I'm doing like a super shag. But for most haircuts, everything just comes straight off the head. Now, traditionally with a men's cut, you would be tempted to want to cut this angle longer on top and shorter on the bottom, because most classic men's haircuts that we see are cut that way because you want it kind of tidier around the bottom. But if you actually look at this haircut, it's not tidy around the bottom. It's actually got some weight around the bottom. So our shape of our haircut is going to be less like this and more like that, almost a straight vertical line. Maybe just a tiny, tiny little bit graduated. So what is the actual length I'm using here? I couldn't tell you like as far as a ruler goes, but what I can tell you is as I'm doing this, I'm sort of feeling the texture of the hair and cutting it to a length that I know it'll bend the way that I want it to. And so that's what dictates my length, at least as far as starting the haircut. Now that I have that first piece that I cut in front, if I pull this hair behind it out of the way, when I take my next section, I can see my last section, and that's going to tell me where to cut this section. The same thing, my sections are leaning the direction I want the hair to lay. I'm pulling the hair straight off the head, and I'm following that guide that I created that was based on how much I want the hair to bend and lay. So when I take my next section here, I'm going to pull it out and use the last section as a guide to cut this one. If I pull the hair out of the way, I can see my last section. So I'm going to do this all the way around the side of the head here. Now, as I get to the back of the haircut, you'll see that the length of the area growing hair, which is about as long as my comb here, is a lot longer than what my fingers can hold. So I'm not going to try to be a hero and put everything up into one section and cut it, because what's going to happen then is I'm bringing this hair from the bottom up and it's traveling further to be cut, so it'll end up longer than the rest of the hair when it falls down, which might not be bad because we can refine it later. But you know, if you want to cut it one time and be done with it, take smaller sections. Pull it out here, cut it to your guide, take another section beneath it, and just follow that guide downward. Now, as I'm doing all of this, I'm not worrying about the perimeter, as I already mentioned. I'm going to go back and refine that later. For now, I'm just making sure that all the layers are straight and uniform. Layers, graduation, I don't know, this kind of sits right in the middle of layers and graduation. It's like a straight vertical cut. So if I were to leave the top longer than the bottom, that would be graduation, but by making the top shorter than the bottom, you would have layers. But our top and bottom are essentially the same length here. I'm creating a very straight shape up and down here, so it's not quite graduation, it's not quite layers, it's just kind of right in between, but it's going to cause the hair to move and flow nicely as we comb it back later. Now when I get to the middle of the back of the head, I'm going to cut this last section right near the middle, and then I'm going to stop and go around to the front of the other side. Something that I've found over my years is if I take this section and I keep taking these guides and moving them over and cutting all the way around from the right side of the head to the left side of the head, it's a lot easier for me to sort of lose my angle that I was working with and end up misshaping the haircut. So I find it's a lot easier if I stop, go back to the other side of the haircut, and make sure that I get this first guide to match the guide on the opposite side, and then work this way. So same thing, I'm going to comb the hair in the direction that I want it to lay. This side doesn't lay back as easily. And also it's really hard for me to cut this side without blocking the camera. So I'm probably going to just do this off camera. So as I'm cutting this first guide, I want to make sure, double check that it's about the same length. You know what, I lied. Maybe I can do this without blocking the camera. Right now, all of my combs have chipped teeth on the end. I was about to order new ones before this stupid pandemic thing happened. And it was weird how they all kind of broke within the same week. It's like they all just gave up together. They had a pact or something. Yeah, I'm over-directing hair there by accident. I'm going to have to go back and fix that. See this hair I pulled this way? I shouldn't have done that. I should have pulled it straight off the head. That's because I was trying not to block the camera. I promise I know how to cut hair. It's just really, really hard to do it on a camera. Look for my guide. Cool. Okay, so now that we've worked the layering or graduation all the way through the sides, you can see that, so the hair kind of sort of air dried as I was resetting up cameras and things here. And you can see that it air dried with some pretty nice movement here. It pretty much wants to do what we want it to do right up until this bottom part. It's kind of naturally air drying with a little flip at the bottom. Now, if you look at Bateman's haircut, it doesn't flip out on the bottom. And if a client wants that look and their hair's flipping out on the bottom, they're going to feel like Kurt Russell. And so the thing about the hair flipping out on the bottom is if I pull hair out and I layer it so it's longer on the bottom and shorter on top, it's going to want to kick out. But if I graduate it, it does the opposite. It'll make it want to kind of bevel in. So think about like a graduated bob. Now, I don't know if this approach I'm going to take here is like officially the way that this would have been done back when he originally had that haircut, but this is my approach to it. So I'm pretty much going to treat the very bottom of this haircut a lot like a graduated bob. I just want to add a little bit of this angle in there. I'm going to start off by pretty much putting a clean straight line across the bottom, clean enough and straight enough anyways. It's actually really hard to do this on a mannequin head. It's easier to do this on a real human because the skin can kind of give and you can get under the hair easier. So now that I've got my blunt straight line, I'm going to take a section out of the middle here, just a thin strip straight down the center of the head, pull these sides out of the way. And then what I'm going to do is, like I said, just treat this just like a graduated bob. I'm going to pull it about 45 degrees down. I can see this is where those layers were that was causing that hair to want to flip up. And so I'm just going to take out the hair beneath it, cut it almost basically to that line right there, just right at the bottom here. As little as I can get away with, because I don't want them to have an actual like graduated bob. I just want to have a little bevel on that bottom piece. So now if I take the hair and I comb it down, I don't know if you can see it in those cameras, but it's going to want to bend inward. So once I have that middle section beveled the way that I want it, let me just double check that I got it right. Nope, I missed a hair. So once this piece is bending inward the way that I want, I'm going to take sections diagonally forward and connect them at a 45-degree angle here. Again, exactly like a graduated bob. So if I pull this out, I can see that section I just cut, and I can see the other hair that was kicking out before. I'm just going to take it off so it can't kick out now. If you look at his haircut, you'll see that it is kind of heavy on these corners, and so that's why the light bulb turned on, like, oh, just treat it like a graduated bob right at the bottom there. Next section, I'm going to elevate it just a little bit here, and there's a lot less to take off. I don't know if you can see this in there, but right up here I've got a guide and just a little bit of hair to take off on these corners. Now as I comb this hair down, boom, it wants to hug his head. It wants to bend inward toward the neck there. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Take my middle guide, bring it over here, take diagonal forward sections, pull them down at 45 degrees. This side was left longer when I put in my blunt line. I messed up a little. Clean up some of that hair that I missed. Okay, so now the back of this haircut wants to hug the head. That's what that tiny little bit of graduation at the bottom did there. It just kind of kicks everything inward. Now that the sides of my hair and the back have been trimmed up to act the way that I want them to, I can connect the top. So this is really, really simple. What I'm going to do is part the hair over on the left and pull the majority of the hair over to the right. And then I'm going to take sections on this right side, pull them out parallel to the floor, and connect them to, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, my previous cut from when I layered the sides. So I'm just going to connect it here, all the way around. As I start working around the back corner here, I'm going to pull the hair more into the direction that it's actually going to lay. I'm not pulling everything straight to the sides. So it's kind of like a pie shape around the back here. Now when I get to the left side, after I work around the back, I'm going to take that left part that I put in there and I'm going to move it over to the right and pull everything to the left. So what this will do is just help me to get the haircut a little bit more symmetrical. If I were to just do a center part and cut the right on the right and cut the left on the left, then what happens is if my part deviates at all, then my haircut's going to have inconsistency. So if I think I parted it perfectly straight down the middle, and then the next time the client does their hair, if a piece that was cut over here falls over here, it might be too long or too short. But by parting it here and cutting it here and then parting it here and cutting it here, it ensures that no hair in the middle can be out of place on either side because it essentially had the opportunity to be cut on both sides. So same process over here. Pulling the hair on top over to the side, connecting it. I feel like I'm doing yoga, trying to cut hair without blocking the camera. Now this side, on most clients, tends to kind of grow forward. And so you have to be really, really careful not to go too short here. Otherwise, when you go to style it back, it just sticks out. So above all, when you're choosing your lengths to do this haircut, again, it's not an exact length. I can't say like, oh, cut it to 3 inches. It just has to be long enough that this hair that grows forward will want to lay back. And so you kind of have to like trial and error that as you're gaining your experience as a hairdresser or barber. And you get to a point where if you wet somebody's hair and comb it around, you know, like, okay, that's not going to bend if I cut it that short. You want to make sure too, as you're doing this, that you're not holding the hair downward. Otherwise, you're going to leave too much weight. You want it straight parallel to the floor. That'll give it just the right amount of weight. It'll kind of make sure you're layering it or graduating it properly. So with water in the hair, at this point, if we comb it around, it looks pretty much there. We got that look. We almost nailed it. But there's something that's kind of missing that you'll see as you try to move the top around. actually it's not horrible on this, but a lot of times when I see renditions of this haircut, they just assume like, oh, it's a very long haircut by today's standards, so everything on top tends to be left a little too long. I think a lot of the reason for that is very popular haircuts today are very long on top and shorter on the sides. But if you actually stop and look at the haircut we're aiming for here, it isn't just super long on top. There's some layering there. We're going to go in and cut some length out of the middle of the hair here. Otherwise, what tends to happen is it just falls too flat. Like right now, it's like super slick. Now, if you want like super slick 80s businessman, sure, leave the top super heavy. But what'll happen if this air dries is it's going to have a lot of that kind of like Disney Prince look. All this weight on top is going to pile up right here, which is fine, but it's not necessarily the look we're going for. If you look at the haircut in question, there's little bits of movement throughout the corners here. There's volume up in the front, and it's going to be a lot easier to get that volume if we do cut the top a little shorter. So the way that we're going to approach this is just like I would cut any pompadour, any classic men's haircut. What I'm going to do is take a section straight down the middle, and this is so hard to do with a missing tooth on my comb. Just a strip of hair to create a guide. So if I take this middle section and pull it up to kind of see what happened to the hair as we connected it over on these sides, you'll see that the hair is shorter in front and much longer in the middle. It kind of creates like that shape right there. We don't want that. We want the hair to at least be parallel to the floor with the client looking straight forward so that it's longer in the front and shorter the rest of the way back. So what I'm going to do is use my longest hair in the front here as a guide. I'm going to pull this whole section straight up, and seeing where that hair hits, I'm just going to cut it straight back from there. And continue that all the way back through this middle section. Now, as the head rounds down here, the design line is going to stay straight still. We're not going to like roll the haircut down, otherwise we'll lose weight over the occipital bone here, and that'll just make the haircut look kind of flat and back. By leaving, you'll see these hairs don't quite reach the line we're cutting. By leaving this strong corner right here, and if I pull the hair out, you can see line, it's like a box. By leaving that strong corner, it's going to build weight right on the widest part of the head, and it just looks nice and pleasing. Now that I've got this section in the middle cut to the shape that I want, I'm going to take sections, I'm going to push it to the right and take sections along the right side that are slightly leaning back. I'm going to pull the hair straight up and cut it parallel to the floor with that middle guide telling me how long to cut each hair. And as I put in that guide in the first place, you could see that near the front I was taking off next to nothing, but near the back of the head I was taking off quite a bit more hair. So you'll see that continue to happen here. So there's my guide. I don't know if you guys can see that. I hope it's in focus. Parallel to the floor. All the way around. And once I've finished cutting the right side, I'm going to part the hair a little bit to the right and bring everything left. So now my middle guide is on the left side. Now, same thing, I'm going to take sections that lean back a little bit, pull the hair straight up. Ooh, I missed one. Not much to cut right there. Section leaning back, pull the hair straight up, and use that middle guide to tell me how much to cut off. Now, when I was working on the sides of the hair, I was using my last section as a guide to cut the next section. That's not what I'm doing here. As I pick up a new section, I'm not holding the old section because the lengths are going to be staggered near the back based on that shape we created with that center guide. So that center guide is the only thing telling me how long to cut each of these hairs. Cool. Now, as I flick the hair around, you can see it wants to pop up a little bit more. Now it's got some movement. It's got some volume in the front there. It's got little pieces that want to do stuff. Okay, so here I thought we had the look before. Now we've got the look. You could totally see it. It's like, oh my gosh, that's that American Psycho haircut. We nailed it. So what I'm going to do now is flat wrap this head, and I'm not going to talk about how to do it here. I have at least 2 videos talking about the flat wrap technique, but at this point when I have the structure of the haircut done, and it's for the most part, even with water in it, acting the way I want it to act, my next step is going to be to flat wrap the hair before I fine tune and refine everything and detail it. So creative cutaway here, and we're going to come back with flat wrapped hair. Okay, so now that the hair's been flat wrapped, what I did is I put in a tiny, tiny little bit of ADH wet before the flat wrap, worked out all the kinks with the blow dryer, smoothed out the hair, and then I used cold air to set it in place. You can see we pretty much got the look now. There's just a couple of little tiny details that need to be worked on. So I like to do this finishing work after the hair's been flat wrapped because I can see exactly how it's going to act. Now, what I'm about to do around the ear here is going to be different for every guest. You kind of have to determine what hair is easily willing to lay back or what hair is easily willing to tuck behind the ear. And then the hair in front of that, you kind of just decide what looks good and trim it accordingly. Now this is, again, harder to do on a mannequin head because the skin doesn't move. If this were a human, I could pull the ear out of the way, and pushing the scissor against the skin would actually, the dull side of the scissor would push the skin out of my way and help me get closer to the hair here. But I'm using a point cutting technique to keep everything really soft. Most of the haircut is, all of the haircut at this point is blunt cut, and it is a very blunt looking haircut, but for these areas that you're gonna see grow back quickly, like the sideburns, I like to keep them softer and just kind of point cut them or whatever. And again, that's just kind of to taste to fit each particular client. I think that looks good. So then around the back here, I'm going to re-refine the line that I put at the nape. Even though the last couple times I passed over this nape area, I try to make it pretty straight. This is the point where I would step back and triple check 5 times to make sure it was absolutely straight. But I'm just going to shape this again to taste. I think this area looks good and straight. This area keeps bugging me right here. And then I'm going to treat these corners the way that I feel they should be treated. And this is also, again, to taste. If you leave it too long, I actually kind of think it looks cool to have it like long and coming forward. But that hard corner there, I don't know. Maybe we want to round that out a little bit just to taste. I'm going to say this for the 3rd time. It's harder to do this on a mannequin because, well, I already explained. Even though I didn't finish this sideburn or that side of the neck, I'm just going to put in a little bit of product here and call it a finished style. So I'm just going to use a tiny, tiny little scrape of product. This is ADH wet. With this look, you really could load it up and it would still look cool, but I still ultimately like movable hair. So I'm just going to put a little bit on the surface here to make the hair stick to itself. Maybe kind of work it through where I want to have more volume. I'm going to set up some lights here and do some glamour shots so you can see the full finished product in all of its glory. Thanks for watching. If you like this and you want more, like, subscribe, let me know. Thank you.